This Dark Shroud project was born one day in the summer of 2017 whilst playing around in the loop library in Logic and creating the seminal track Undo, the first ever track I published under the moniker This Dark Shroud. The name itself comes from a lyric taken from my solo, mid-tempo dark electronic music track, Black Nail, written the prior year and then rearranged and re-recorded via Logic with MIDI keyboard earlier in 2017. The initial idea for TDS, though at the time, as now, a solo side project, was that it would feature music that was more abstract, beat-heavy, even industrial, as its influences sound-wise and conceptually were, essentially, artists such as Nine Inch Nails, Coil, and Skinny Puppy, then the material I was then recording as Marc Lowe. And while it was as true then as it is now that as Marc Lowe, I also often recorded and released various kinds of electronic and experimental music, the TDS versions, especially at the beginning, were essentially remixed and or rearranged versions of things I'd already released as Marc Lowe on this or that solo LP. Except now they would have their own unique TDS versions to instead be included in a totally different context on my TDS albums. For example, Not Real adds beats and backing vocal loops as well as various effectors to my slow acoustic arpeggio ballad Bird to create a completely different atmosphere. Hate, Burn, Push, Break is an obvious, darker and noisier, not to mention more abstract remix of Black Nail. World is an Illusion takes the melody line from my acoustic versions of Chaos and turns them into two instrumental interludes, and so on. During the first phase of TDS, which I consider as lasting roughly a year and a half from its inception with Undo, and the first EP, which was later expanded into an LP, until late 2018, I created no less than 6 LPs as This Dark Shroud. The first batch of LPs included many of the types of tracks I have heretofore described, remixed or rearranged things I was doing as Marc Lowe in a darker, more decadent style, along with pieces such as Undo, but they also included many other original compositions made as and for TDS, such as Interior and Exterior Landscapes, What Was Her Name, Invisible, No Exit, and so on. By the time I got to the final TDS LPs I would produce solo in 2018, I was creating longer soundscapes such as Dust, which, in its full version, is over 20 minutes in length. For this reason, perhaps, my bassist, with whom I'd been collaborating regularly at the time, Joe Shotaro, would frequently refer to my TDS material as particularly filmic. And this is where Joe enters more fully into the This Dark Shroud story that is herein represented in sound on the retrospective compilations I have recently produced. By 2019, Joe Shotaro and I had already been collaborating together for some time, first in the Laughing Moon trio of late 2017 with guitarist Tana. Around the same time, in fact, I had just started recording under the This Dark Shroud moniker with Undo and the first This Dark Shroud LP, and then as a duo under different names. We had considered Blue Skulls, and then we were simply Marc Lowe and Joe Shotaro. That is, until one fateful day in 2019 when finally I offered an idea. How about taking the This Dark Shroud moniker for our duo project? At first, Joe visibly hesitated, as I recall, thinking perhaps that TDS was my baby and was something that was moving into the realm of dark soundscape rather than something to be performed live on stage. In the end, however, we went with This Dark Shroud. We played many shows together under its dark shroud-like umbrella throughout that entire year, 2019. But we also spent hundreds of hours, perhaps it was tens, recording at my home studio. In other words, my apartment or Lionstone studio, a trio of LPs released as the new TDS, the new This Dark Shroud. Joe would bring his bass and or his guitar bass over to my place in order to record using the guitar amp I then owned, along with a huge effector pedal board he'd lug along each time he came in order to achieve the bass plus electric guitar or bass and electric guitar sound he was after. And off it went. In the beginning, Joe would mostly work on arrangements of my more electronic songs, such as Black Nail, The Dials in the Bathroom, Digital Errors, and so on, record them with the tracks I had already laid down in Logic for my original Marc Lowe versions, so-called, playing along with a click in headphones, and I would later arrange the songs with his parts, often re-effectorizing them. Eventually, we would start sitting together at my place as I mixed, and he would advise me how he wanted or didn't want something to sound, or give suggestions about how to arrange things for our duo versions, and then I would further remix my own parts from how they had sounded in the Marc Lowe versions to create the new This Dark Shroud versions. After having recorded together for a while, we began creating brand new material of our own for the project. Songs such as Prism, which is on the compilation, where Joe is singing some lead vocals in a Marilyn Manson type voice. For the first of two retrospective LPs, I selected those tracks from a fairly large pool of songs and demos, which I feel have that This Dark Shroud circa 2019 sound going for them. Most especially tracks like Lost Control, Open Up the Scar, The Dials in the Bathroom, and of course Black Nail. I also included some alternative mixes, or alternate mixes, that have never before been released officially, such as the fragmentary experimental outtake Scream, which in fact I just recently rediscovered, the alt mix of only 3, or the second of 2 mixes I had done for the spoken word track Endpoint. In October of 2019, I left Fukuoka for Tokyo for work. I had thought that the TDS project was finished more or less for good. But then, in 2023, I decided to revive the This Dark Shroud TDS project. This was in the spring of 2023, and it was the first time I'd thought about doing it again since the late 19 duo project after I'd come to Tokyo. Today, it continues as an off and on solo side project, depending on my mood, the tides, the moon, and various other completely unpredictable variables. Why did I revive it? Well, this is a long story, one best saved for another time. I discussed this in various talk videos on my YouTube page, if anyone is interested. In short, the composition of what I had intended as a new beat-heavy track, which became Vanity, reminded me so much of the initial iteration of TDS, This Dark Shroud, that I almost had no choice but to publish it as This Dark Shroud, and thus began the revived version, the revival, that the second retrospective compilation documents. One of the questions I posed last year as part of a lengthy spoken word track, not included on the compilation, but one can find it on the Signs Were There LP, is, or was, what is This Dark Shroud anyway? In other words, what does TDS, This Dark Shroud, mean to me today? Well, when is today anyway? Tomorrow, today will have been yesterday, and yesteryear was once today, but no longer is. So, well, yes, its definition, the definition of This Dark Shroud, is ever changing, ever evolving, like the music itself has evolved over the years. Hopefully, this compilation that I've made, Retrospective II, and the compilation that precedes it, covering the years 2017 through 2019, will serve as a document, again together, that will make this evolution clearer to the listener, he or she who has the time, the concentration, and or the interest to connect the dots for him or herself. In any case, with this updated version of this Dark Shroud, meaning 2023-24, started, or better to say perhaps rebooted, like they call the Matrix series, in the spring of last year with the track Vanity, 2023, which I consider the cousin to Undo, the project has frankly increasingly become more and more difficult, even for its creator, to distinguish this Dark Shroud from Marc Lowe anymore. The music I've recorded, released, or performed live as Marc Lowe has become much more improvisational and experimental in recent years, especially from COVID, the COVIDian times, as I often refer to them, onward. And so some of the TDS material from last year, especially those things that had their source material couched in the past, such as the bulk of the material I recorded or re-recorded for the 9 LP, actually seem to me now less experimental than much of the things I've been releasing as Marc Lowe these past few years. This is ironic, since the first iteration of this Dark Shroud solo was, to me, more experimental, as well as darker and more industrial, and so on, than the Marc Lowe material I was making at that particular time. That being said, the material from this year's This Dark Shroud, that is 2024, which includes the LPs The Unbecoming, the very recently completed Melting Point LP, which is also on Bandcamp, and the long-form in-studio improvisation Emptiness in Form, definitely, I would say, falls more on the experimental side of my music and of the This Dark Shroud music I've made. Or does it? Or rather, is there even a difference between This Dark Shroud and Marc Lowe anymore? Well, no, and also yes. This Dark Shroud is This Dark Shroud, and Marc Lowe is Marc Lowe. But This Dark Shroud is also Marc Lowe, and Marc Lowe is certainly also This Dark Shroud. You won't hear me doing any acoustic-only songs as This Dark Shroud, but you can at times as Marc Lowe. That being said, you also, won't hear me in tone with effectorized voice, the This Dark Shroud refrain at the beginning of a Marc Lowe piece. However, you might indeed hear a reference to my darker side project in a spoken word bit included on a Marc Lowe album, and you can also hear me refer to myself being Marc Lowe, or Mark, or me, or I, on some of this year's This Dark Shroud material, and on some of the new remixes. For example, as part of the lengthy spoken word samples used on Tokyo Nightwalk, from The Unbecoming or Behind the Scenes, also from that album, and so on. For the second of two retrospective compilations, then, which tells essentially, then, you could say roughly 1/2 of, or some percentage of, maybe it's, 53% or 47% or something. I don't know what weight to give it. The fuller This Dark Shroud story, 1/2 of the fuller This Dark Shroud story, or some percentage thereof, I included nearly everything from last year's triptych of LPs, recorded under the This Dark Shroud moniker, though I did leave off one or two things from each respective LP release for one or another reason. Note that the latter compilation also includes, in addition to tracks from the albums proper, 4 new, and all of them are from 2024, previously unavailable remixes of earlier material, including a new interpretation of Digital Errors, a track originally composed and recorded solo as Marc Lowe in 2018, and re-recorded or performed live as part of the duo This Dark Shroud in 2019, as well as Non-Entity, in parentheses, Minotaur's Maze, a reinterpretation for piano and voice of a 9 Inch Nails With Teeth album era B-side. So now, to conclude, let me also add that my former collaborator, Joe Shotaro, bassist and guitar bassist, has twice joined me on stage for this Dark Shroud live reunions in Fukuoka, both last summer, it's 2023, and this past summer, 2024. Though this time around, this summer, I performed as Marc Lowe instead of as this Dark Shroud. The videos for these performances can be viewed on my YouTube page. Both compilations, i.e. both retrospective compilations, retrospective covering 2017 through 19, and the second one covering 2023 and 24, are now available at thisdarkshroud.bandcamp.com. I may put them on marklowe.bandcamp.com as well eventually. Thank you then for your time and your interest in this Dark Shroud. And head over to Bandcamp, if you will, to have a listen to these two compilations. Thank you.